Hey everybody, welcome to a very special edition of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. This episode was recorded live in Bangkok, Thailand during the week of DevCon 7 from November 11th to 15th, 2024. If you're listening to this on audio, you might want to switch over to YouTube just to get the full effect of the show. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/@rehashweb3. Don't forget to join us on Telegram as well at t.me/rehashweb3 to connect with fellow listeners and stay up to date on all things Rehash, including our upcoming guest elections starting in January right after the holidays, and any upcoming events where you can attend a Rehash show in person. If you've enjoyed listening to Rehash, please give us a rating and review on whichever platform you prefer listening or watching on. And don't forget to share it with a friend or a family member as well who you think will enjoy this episode. I hope you have a very happy holiday season and please enjoy the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash. This is day 2 in DevCon and we have a very special panel with 2 very special guests. We actually did a little last minute switcheroo because we were supposed to have Kelvin from Optimism here with us today to debate rollups with David Silverman, but Kelvin unfortunately is ill and wasn't able to make it. So we have David here with us regardless. And Jonah, my lovely co-host, who is going to help me through all of this technical talk. So David Silverman is the SVP of Strategic Product Initiatives at Polygon, and Jonah is the co-founder of Den. Do you guys want to give a more detailed introduction of yourselves and what you do in your roles? David?
Yeah, I'm David. I work for Polygon Labs. We're an Ethereum scaling solutions company building the AggLayer, which is a framework for chains to interoperate with each other, whether they're L1, L2, L3, whatever next paradigm comes out. We're agnostic to VM, we're agnostic to consensus, which is all a very fancy way of saying we are going to help the multi-chain future feel correct so that when you remove your bag bias, you won't actually know or care about what chain you're using under the hood. So that's what we're building at Polygon.
Awesome. And Jonah?
Hey everyone, I'm Jonah Erlich. I'm one of the co-founders of Den. Den is the end-to-end wallet built for teams. Teams use Den to send crypto and fiat, use dApps and DeFi, interact with smart contracts, and even do their bookkeeping. Over $1 billion has been processed through the platform, and it's open for you to use. If you have a Gnosis safe, you can even just sign in and get started.
Awesome. So this was meant to be a debate between David and Kelvin, but since Kelvin isn't here, David has graciously decided that he would partake in the Hot Ones challenge that we did yesterday. And so they're loaded up on the hot sauces that they want to sample from last night's panel. And we've got some food in front of us and we're just going to be eating that as we go along. And so hopefully the more spice you eat, the spicier your takes get as well.
I'm here for that.
Awesome. So to start, why don't we just start super basic and talk about what rollups are. Let's start there. We're going to get way more technical for most of the episode, but let's just start basic.
Yeah. So a rollup is a scaling solution, right? We have ETH, and that's the great base layer. And for most people, that's what they came into the space. That's what they transacted on, right? That's the home of all the major apps that you've used before: Uniswap, Aave, Compound, OpenSea. The problem is ETH has limited space. There's a lot more people that want to use it than the block space is there, and that begins to price people out. And that's not ideal if we're trying to build this next platform for the entire internet. And so a lot of really smart people came together and they said, we're going to create this thing called layer 2s. And what layer 2s are is basically another blockchain that inherits the security and decentralization from Ethereum, from layer 1, and using various properties is able to take certain shortcuts and centralize up on the L2 level to provide more scalability and other performance changes while still keeping the same base security considerations and decentralization considerations from Ethereum. And a lot of great Ethereum research led to this, and we've really started to see them blossom in the past 2-3 years.
Gotcha. So as with anything, there are trade-offs to everything in life. And with the speed and security that you get with, with the scalability that you get with rollups, are there any trade-offs that we see with speed and security and other aspects?
Yeah. So at least as rollups as they are today, I wouldn't say they're in their complete state. There is still some folks you have to trust. The first one being the block producer, or the sequencer, as we like to say. And currently today, I think for basically every single rollup, it is centralized. One party, one company decides if a block is built or not, at least in a majority of circumstances. And so that means let's take Base, for example, which is operated by Coinbase as the sequencer. If Coinbase wants to block your transaction, they're able to do so, at least for a period of time. Now, the benefit, I guess, is because it is only one entity building blocks, we don't have to worry about having thousands of nodes and validators with, respect for home stakers and low computing requirements, we can have a really big beefy server. And so Coinbase in some data center somewhere is running a massive machine, and therefore they can process thousands of transactions per second. It is the goal to get to 1 gig of gas as their stated goal. And that allows them to have, much more bandwidth, much more space for transactions, space for consumers and apps that isn't available on ETH.
To dig into that a little bit more, for folks that are using L2s today, what sort of risk for example, taking when I'm using an L2, and what sort of upgrades are coming to L2s in the near future to help mitigate those risks?
Yeah. So the current main risk you're taking is, at least for a short period of time, you do have to trust the centralized operator is, one, acting honestly and reporting state correctly, and two, is not censoring you or trying to censor you. Now, for an overwhelming majority of people, that is sufficient in order to get the trade-offs. Now, the problem comes, well, what happens when they start censoring? Let's say that for all of a sudden, my friend wanted to do a transaction, not my friend. Let's say that somebody from North Korea wanted to do a transaction. They're sanctioned.
Are they your friends?
They're not, unfortunately. Or fortunately. Let's say someone from North Korea wanted to make a transaction, right? Sanctioned country, sanctioned entity. Coinbase might have to reject that at the sequencer level. Well, the question is going to go, what if they were to apply that not just to sanctions list? Let's say for some reason Coinbase got into a war with Binance and they said all Binance users can't transact on Base. I know, hypothetical, extreme case, but this is the type of things we think through in Ethereum world. And, the way we protect against this is through kind of the rollup protocol. And then they're using a protocol called Optimism, which has the ability for a forced inclusion. So from the L1 side on Ethereum, yes, it's more expensive. Yes, it's slower. I can do a transaction on Ethereum that will force a state change up on the layer 2. So for some reason, I'm trying to withdraw my money out of the layer 2. And again, Coinbase is like, well, actually, we want you to withdraw. We want to keep your funds trapped. Using Ethereum, I'm going to have to pay a little bit more. It's going to be slower, but I still have the ability to exit because I'm relying on the censorship resistant and decentralized properties of Ethereum in order to get some safety benefits back up on the layer 2.
So this feels like a great way of segueing into the different types of L2s that exist today, specifically optimistic rollups and ZK rollups are the two types of popular L2s, and they handle those problems differently of how do you guarantee the security of your funds as well as the ability to exit, which is really the critical aspect when considering the security of a rollup. So can you give a high-level overview to everyone of what is an optimistic rollup, what is a ZK rollup, and what are their different security properties?
Ultimately, the way to kind of think about a rollup from the L1 perspective, and this will help us get the difference, is we have some bridge. And you could bridge funds up and messages up, and we could receive funds and receive messages. The question is going to be, at what point does the bridge know about something new that happened on the L2? So the sequencer is going to send something down. It's going to say, hey, I went from point A to point B. And these are all the transactions that occurred in it. And the question is, at what point do you know that is the actually what happened? I went from point A to point B. And that, let's give an example of what could be included in there. I am trying to withdraw 15 USDC. Just a real simple example. If I want to actually process that withdrawal, what do I have to wait? So in an optimistic rollup, they'll say, hey, there's this fraud window. We wait for a certain amount of time for somebody to put their hand up and say, hey, something not nice is going on there. But if no one does, we're going to think the world is bright and full of roses and we're just going to let it pass and people can withdraw. And currently, most optimistic rollups, I think almost all of them are doing 7 days as the standard of, if no one raises their hand up and says something's wrong after 7 days, we're just gonna let it slide. ZK rollups, as we like to joke, they've seen some things. They know that the world is dark and full of terrors. And so they're like, unless you can prove to me with math that state transition for going from point A to point B that includes your withdrawal actually happened, that you can write a mathematical proof, I am not moving forward. I've been rugged too much. I've been hurt too much. They probably could use some therapy, but really what they want is just a state transit. They want that ZK proof. And the difference is because you're not waiting for somebody to put hand up, hey, something was wrong, you can finalize instantaneously. As soon as the proof is made available, we can settle and move on. Now, there's another difference. We use the word rollup generally and layer 2 to kind of refer to a suite of scaling solutions. Rollups tend to refer to things that are posting this data, this transactional data, to Ethereum. There's another flavor of these scaling solutions called Validiums or Optimiums or Celestiums, which basically are just fancy words for the data is stored somewhere else. And so it's a little bit less secure. The academics will say, to be a rollup, you have to be able to reconstruct the L2 state using nothing but an Ethereum node. But realistically, we kind of group this all together under the word L2.
So one thing I've heard you say, and actually I want us to take a bite of the spicy sauce for this, because one thing, go for it, I'll explain this. One thing that I've heard you say is that rollups actually aren't real, or rollups don't exist. And so we've just spent, however long talking about what rollups are, what's the difference between all of these rollups. And now it's like, what? But really, like, you think rollups don't exist? Also, how's the hot sauce?
It's not bad.
It's not bad. Okay,
It's the low entry one. So
oh, okay. You save the good one for later. So yeah, why do you think rollups don't exist?
So I think it's a way to help frame exactly what's happening in the system. Ultimately, from the perspective of Ethereum L1, there is no rollup. There's a bridge smart contract and there's a settlement contract that contains this is the last known checkpoint. And from the rollup itself, like up on the L2 side of things, doesn't know about layer one. There's some contracts and functions that will let it know about something that happened. But ultimately, they are kind of to a point two independent blockchains, two independent systems that don't know about each other. There's just a bridge that is secured connecting and some other contracts that basically ensure that if the bridge is to be maintained, you have to follow certain rules. There's nothing really stopping outside of social alignment and probably a lawsuit Coinbase from fully ignoring an included state and breaking away from the bridge. We'll ignore upgradability and all sorts of other things, but that is kind of what we say when a lot of people say rollups aren't real. It's a great framework for breaking away from the kind of higher level structures and stories we tell ourselves to define these systems and break down to like, what does the actual like on-chain code say? Not what is the implication of the code. And so again, from sort of looking at the system, it's not really a rollup. You have two blockchains and a relationship between them in this bridge and a social agreement that we don't want to lose user funds.
What does this look like going forward? Because obviously this is a state that we can't persist with forever if we're going to be holding a significant amount of the global economy on these rollups. What is the next step beyond social consensus to ensure that a rollup, which for all intents and purposes, we can consider an independent blockchain, matches the state that's within the bridge contract on Ethereum mainnets?
So I guess the question, there's a separate question to unpack, which is like, do we actually move forward fully? Does everyone move forward with this rollup framework? And if people want to move forward with the rollup framework, the way it moves is basically actually encoding all of these properties in which we've said. So making it so that the only way you can advance the state forward is affirmatively getting a ZK proof or affirmatively going through a fraud window. There is no upgrade to change that. There's no way to bypass that. If there's a flaw, it's unfortunate, we're kind of screwed. So we have some training wheels. The other thing could be things like self-sequencing for transactions, self-proving, which would allow for, if an operator went down, the ability to exit out of a rollup. We've seen a great example of this lately with DYDX. They had their V3, which was a StarkX application, which is a type of ZK rollup, and they shut it down, and there's a great UI. You can go and freely exit. It's not like DYDX is operating that anymore. It is literally a fully independent way to exit a system from a dead company. People are moving in that direction. Recently, Optimism and Base turned on their fraud proofs. It was great to see them go from stage 0, which is just trust me, bro security, to actual fraud proofs. And we've seen Arbitrum has had permission fraud proofs for a while, also stage 1. And I hopefully think we're going to see lots of other rollups start taking off those training wheels and actually living up to the principles by which they said they were founded. If they want that, when there's a whole other host of chains that are going a completely different route.
I also want to ask about interoperability. And I know this is something that Den has been working on too. And everybody is talking about, because if you have all of these different L2s, it just is not a practical experience for any consumer really to have to bridge all the time and to have to make sure they have ETH on every single different chain. So cross-chain interoperability is a really important thing. And I know Polygon's been working on that as well. How is Polygon thinking about that problem and approaching it?
Yeah. So we've approached it, I think, pretty uniquely in the space. There's kind of two types of scaling of like interop solutions that we've seen. There's the rollup cluster approach, which is a group of rollups or a group of L2s that are using the same type of security system, live under the same kind of interoperability and security umbrella. An example of this would be Superchain. At some point in the future, hopefully soon, they will all be connected and there will be some interoperability for a suite of chains that have agreed to work together in some capacity, ... trust us in the future. There's the ZK sync.
Are you talking within the Superchain?
Within the Superchain.
Okay.
They will be able to interoperate together, but only strictly there.
Yeah.
And the same approach is being followed by ZK Sync with the Elastic chain, which is, all of these rollups that are using the same ZK property can interoperate with each other. Then there's people who are taking a more general purpose approach, and these are teams like Layer 0, like Wormhole, like Chainlink, CCIP, which are saying we're just going to build generic messaging bridges. It's not tied to the actual, whether you're a rollup or not, contact our company and you get it that way. And then I think there's the approach that we are taking at Polygon. We started and have observed the rollup cluster approach. However, we think the rollup cluster approach definitely is not the direction we want it to go in, because while we've spoken a lot about rollups and a lot of teams building rollups, there's a lot of teams that are building other things. Things like L3s, things like alternate L1s, teams like Barachain, like Solana, like Near, like DSC, where there's incredible value and people are going to want to connect and move between them. There's also like teams that build Web3 adjacent software that may want to connect directly to chains as opposed to having to use smart contracts directly. These are the things like stablecoins. Stablecoin issuers can connect now directly into an interoperability solution. Chainlink's doing similar things by connecting like Swift outbanks message straight to blockchains as well. Our approach has been grounded in ZK, which says we are going to make a baseline security guarantee. Your asset cannot be rugged when moving from chain to chain, or chains cannot rug each other, and let the chains define everything else. Be as maximally welcoming as possible while giving a baseline security guarantee to allow chains to trustlessly work together with each other. Ultimately, users should not care about any of this at all. We make it too painful for you all now. I'm sorry. I wish we were better, but we're moving in the correct direction.
Yeah, and the end state of all of that is just like users can interoperate between Polygon, all the Optimism superchain things.
Arbitrum, Orbit, ZK, say Avalanche. It can even do Solana. You can do the Solana network extensions, which is their marketing term for L2. You can use Cosmos chains.
Yeah.
You can use non-blockchain systems. We announced that we're working with Agora to bring AUSD by, again, them taking their literal stablecoin issuance software and plugging into the AggLayer directly to allow them to mint redeem stablecoins across all connected chains. And so this idea of combining network systems, and it's not actually for users to move. I think this is mainly for application developers to say, there's a great stablecoin here, there's a great lending market here, there's a great DEX here, there's a great NFT market here, and build great experiences.
Right.
I think, as I said at the top, if we didn't have bag bias, we wouldn't care what chain we were using.
So getting a little bit into how this works.
Eat the spice. Did you try the spicier sauce yet?
We'll work up to that.
He's not brave enough.
No, he's scared.
So let's get a little bit deeper into how this actually works. Mm-hmm. So define a little bit more directly, like what is the AggLayer? How does it enable interoperability between L2s, L3s, other L1s, EVM or otherwise?
So the AggLayer itself is a series of smart contracts, tooling, and a node that allow for a very similar construct we spoke before. There is a bridge contract on Ethereum, but also on every single one of these other systems. We call it the LXLY unified bridge. And ultimately, you would send a message or send an asset, and it gets put into this data structure that we call a tree, like a global exit tree, which is a fancy way of saying we're taking all this data, putting it into a cryptographic data structure that we can securely move and verify. And what we then do is the AggLayer node receives all these updates from all these chains, and using a ZK proof, aggregates a series of proofs together and submits down to Ethereum and says, here's the new state. Here's this very long, complicated ZK proof that I've compressed down. You do one verification, and similar to how we said that the L2 operated before of like, we went from point A to point B, everyone moves from point A to point B at the same time. And then an L2 and L3 and L1 can look back at Ethereum and say, here's the latest update. Let me sync that up. And we can all update internally. That's kind of how it works in slow mode. Now, what is the proof that they are aggregating? That proof is something we've created called the pessimistic proof, opposite of optimistic. Because again, we've all seen some scary things happen with bridges. We've seen optimistic bridges get hacked, Nomad and others. We've seen ZK things get hacked by poor setup. We've seen, just trust me, row bridges, like the original wormhole, get hacked or multi-chain. And so the pessimistic proof is basically a statement by a chain showing that for any withdrawal, it can match to a deposit. And this is pretty similar to a point of like how Bitcoin works, that like you need to point to somebody sending you money in order to send money somewhere else. So if a user on a chain wants to withdraw 5 USDC from, let's say, Polygon back to Ethereum, or send it from Polygon over to AggLayer, a chain from OKX, Polygon POS, when it sends its new state to the AggLayer, has to create this proof that shows a user is leaving with 5 USDC, and I received 5 USDC somewhere else, like earlier in the history, and then we nullify it out. But we do it for all outbound transfers. That proof said nothing about how POS did its own transactions. It said nothing about POS's consensus. It provides a very minimal baseline guarantee. We aggregate all of those together. Ethereum checks it. And if Ethereum says, hey, nobody's rugging anyone, we get to go forward.
So for this, would L2s need to migrate from their existing bridge contracts to exclusively using the AggLayer bridge contract? And would non-L2s need to also be posting their state to Ethereum L1 in the same way that L2s do today?
So I think it's, so I'll always start with the second question. I think that's the easier of the two. It doesn't necessarily have to be the L2 submits the state, because for some of these L1s, there is no the person that operates it. And hopefully L2s get to the point where there is no the person operating it, right? This decentralized network. Any interested party can submit state to any blockchain. And so yes, presumably there's an interested party that wants to submit it. Again, it's not to L1, it submits to the AggLayer nodes, the AggLayer service, which is just a proof generation network. But anyone can also submit down to L1. As for do they have to move their bridges? That depends, I guess, on what kinds of assets. Anyone could deploy the AggLayer suite of contracts and networks, and it would express new assets. But if you wanted to roll over your existing TVL, yes, there would need to be a migration. We're going to be doing it for POS to show everyone that it is safe and doable. POS has billions of dollars of assets. It's going to be a very large migration. I am personally terrified and nervous for it, but our devs are super calm and ready to go. And we'll be seeing that early next year. And it is something that, obviously this is targeted for new chains. Configure it from day one. But for existing ones, there's a migration path, and it does involve slowly rolling your assets over into the AggLayer bridge.
What are your biggest concerns about the upcoming upgrade?
It's just a lot of money. I get worried about this. It's a lot of money. I think like the problem's the problem, whether it's $5 or $1 billion, you want to do it correct.
Unfortunately, we didn't have Kelvin here today to explain us the counterpoint on the Optimism solution for interoperability. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to do something really challenging and steelman the Optimism argument for 10-year Kelvin. Why is the Optimism solution better? What does that solution look like?
The solution, as I understand it, is called native interop, and it does operate in a similar kind of like messaging system. And again, I'm doing my best based off the documentation that's been released. It's under active development. So like, if you're interested, go read the docs as they currently are today. As of time of recording, this is probably out of date. They basically combine their fraud-proof windows to a point. So it's like, yep, we wait 7 days for the first chain to settle, and there's 7 days for the secondary chain to settle, and you get to like 14 days total. But again, practically, these chains are all optimistically working in the correct direction. And so you're never going to kind of get that kind of fault-proof situation.
So it seems like...
And everyone's running, and all these operators are running full nodes of each other. So it's pretty easy to detect if somebody's doing something malicious to not screw your own chain, I think is what they would say, is that you're doing all of this overkill for something that in 99+% of cases is going to be fine. And also we can always upgrade to ZK down the line. Let's just get something out that works. My counterpoint would be ZK works. It's here today. The OP stack is now ZK provable with amazing teams like Succinct, with their SP1 program that's built using Polygon's tech with Blanky 3. There's other teams that have proven the ZK UVM in many different ways. Us, ZK Sync, Scroll, Tycho, and more. I would say let's stop making excuses for, trying to get to mass market, and let's build things that are true to our original principles.
I like it. Good job arguing against yourself. You've won the debate from both sides because, it's you versus you. I'm going to give you a little break. You feel free to try tee up the spice for the next one. I'm going to do a quick ad break, so give you a chance to take some bites. But do you want to just shout out to our lovely sponsors for this episode and for this event, Crosscats and Safe? Crosscats is cupcakes right there representing Crosscats. Crosscats is the only bridge built for all VMs to help you connect to hard-to-reach blockchains so you can access new opportunities and make more money. You can go to crosscats.xyz to check them out today. And Safe, which you know as Gnosis Safe formerly, is the ownership layer of Web3 with the most battle-tested smart accounts. Trusted to secure over $75 billion, Safe offers unparalleled usability and security for individuals, DAOs, and institutions. You can experience true digital ownership with Safe's flagship web and mobile wallet and its leading account abstraction infrastructure. So the next question I wanted to ask you, David, is we've talked about like interoperability and like the good things that a unified ecosystem of interoperable rollups can bring. Mm-hmm. Can you give any examples of successful implementations of that we've seen to date?
I mean, candidly, they're all still rolling out. It's pretty early.
Yeah.
I would say a great example of some of this cross-chain UX. I'm gonna give a shout out to an app I've actually been using. It's not in the Polygon ecosystem. We're gonna spread the love. There's an app called Moonwell on Base. Moonwell is a decentralized lending product. One of the amazing things they've done is it doesn't matter where you hold USDC on any chain. From the Moonwell application, you can immediately deposit into their application backend on Base, and you can withdraw that USDC out to any application. And it's using a different interoperability platform from Circle called CCTP, Circle Cross-Chain Transport Protocol, and which is exclusive for USDC and EURC, their stablecoins. But it has done a great implementation there. Polymarket, which is an application that can be used to predict markets, such as elections or sports or reality TV. You can do a very similar thing, deposit USDC from any chain, go make your bets, and then withdraw out to exchanges directly as well. I think those are some of the early examples we've started to see who have done it in a great consumer way.
I do want to move into just talking about like the future of Rollups, Jonah, unless you have any other follow-up questions on like the interoperability cross-chain piece that I didn't cover.
I think as one last final question, and this does somewhat look towards the future, is what risks are app and protocol developers taking today by selecting a different interoperability solution, and how challenging will it be to switch to something new if existing solutions don't end up becoming the standard?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because the space is young and rapidly maturing. I think the biggest risk for especially contract developers is watching out for vendor lock-in. Or if you want to change later and you've made your contract immutable, can you actually do it? And that's kind of the real big risk that we warn and watch out to teams. I think that's kind of the biggest one. I'd say for app developers, really understanding the failure cases and taking that to account in your application. What happens if the message fails, and am I handling that error correctly, even if the error is never supposed to happen? I think this is early. Be prepared to switch. And that's why I said like the critical thing for us was developing AggLayer is not just finding a way to make people be able to switch onto it. It is understanding what the failure case is if people want to leave us and what that upgrade path looks like. To be clear, we've made it so that there is no vendor lock-in. People can leave without Polygon's approval or anything else, or any other AggLayer operator's approval, and you can just move your TVL off to another bridge given a migration path. And so it's something we encourage other operability providers to do. Ensure there is not critical vendor lock-in. That's something that I believe is an ethos of the Web3 space. And again, for app devs, especially if you're working in some of these very newer tech, you're working with provers, you're working with interoperability, you're working with cross-chain stuff, understand the failure cases, understand vendor lock-in, and understand what a migration will look like and how painful it will be for you.
So looking ahead to the future of rollups, one thing that you brought up earlier in our conversation is like the piece about how rollups today aren't fully decentralized. They're all pretty centralized to some extent. So what is it going to take for us to get to that level of decentralization that we're going for in the future?
Yeah, I think it depends on, first off, what level of decentralization teams want to get to. Assuming you want to kind of take it to the max, the first is comfortability that these proof systems work. Whether optimistic fraud proofs or whether ZK systems, they're all really new and constantly being iterated. One I'm excited about, Tycho, I think literally has done 68 total upgrades on an average of 2 days, like one every 2 days. SP1, an amazing new ZK VM, has updated its verifier basically every 4 days since it came to mainnet. That is just way too immature of a system to say I'm turning off upgradability or I'm doing a very delayed upgrade path, which is something to get to true full final decentralization stage 3, as we call it. The other thing is we're going to want to decentralize the sequencer role. That's something that we have some experience with, as plenty of times we've done DPoS in order to decentralize a sequencer network. I think there's still a ton of research on it, ton of research happening, and what that looks like, especially at kind of interoperability world. And the third is balancing this ability for users to exit with the ability to defend in case of attack, and us or ourselves coming up with those standards. I think those are kind of the next steps for decentralization. I don't have a timeline on when we get there. And I think most importantly, I don't think everyone's going to take it. There's costs associated with these systems. And for some of the more cost sensitive situations, gaming, social, things where there isn't a lot of inherent, like it's very cost sensitive, very low margin. I don't know if you're going to want to pay for that level of security. And so also understanding how we signal that to users is really important.
It's really hard to figure out. I mean, I feel like that's what the DAO people have been trying to figure out for the last 5 years or more, however long DAOs have been around. So definitely challenging there. And I understand. Have you seen any rollups or projects that you think have taken some correct steps in the right direction?
Yeah, I would actually give a great shout out to Arbitrum, which is kind of from day one, never compromised on we need to have a proof system out there. They're slow to bring out updates. I know Bold's coming soon and really excited to see it, which is their next gen proof framework to let anyone submit a proof. They've also been very progressive in giving their DAO actual control. Their DAO owns the upgrader, their DAO owns the executor, their DAO controls their treasury and a lot of other things. And it's something I wish that some of the other twos that are more mature would do. To be clear, us at Polygon don't fall into that camp yet either. I hope we get to there when both our ecosystem community and tech is mature enough where we feel comfortable. Obviously, every team in DAO has its own risk tolerance too, which factors into this. So I'd give a big shout out to Arbitrum. I think they're doing things really well. And obviously the Fuel team and VM Rollup. Shout out to the sponsor Crosscats. I know they support Fuel, but also Fuel is the second iteration. They had an optimistic rollup, but they actually made full stage 2 from day 1, which meant there was no upgrade key. Anyone could do fallback, full user permissionless, and the confidence and guts to do something like that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for them.
Yeah. What new projects or like new developments are you most excited for? And talk about any smaller projects or smaller rollups too, because everybody knows like Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, but a lot of the smaller ones maybe people haven't heard of that like people should keep an eye on.
Yeah. I'll do some deep tech ones, then some consumer ones.
Okay,
on the deep tech side, teams that I think are really fascinating. There's a team called Fabric that's doing like hardware acceleration for ZK proofs. If that works out, we're talking 2 orders of magnitude decrease in cost, which means like now social and gaming become obtainable for full ZK execution proofs. I would give a shout out to a couple of the ZK VM teams, Zero, Succinct, and Lita, which are making really great general purpose ZK systems. So you don't need to have gigabrain mathematicians on your team. You can just write Rust code and get a ZK proof. For the rollups themselves, at least, some of the ones I'm excited to see, Xi, XAI, and the Arbitrum ecosystem has got a ton of really awesome games lined up. I'm excited to see what they have in the pipeline. Newton, which was just announced recently from Magic Link, the wallet abstraction platform that has powered apps like Polymarket, is doing like a key store and consumer rollup. We're super excited to see what they bring on there. They've previously powered experiences from Mattel and others. So again, bringing some of those companies actually on chain. And I'm actually really excited also for Unichain. I know it's not live yet. I'm really excited to see what a great consumer forward team like them is going to bring, design forward team like them is going to bring to market. What are you looking forward to?
There's a lot I'm looking forward to, but I actually want to direct things towards a spicy question on L2.
Let's let him take a bite.
Rollups.
Have you gone for the gold one yet?
That's this one.
This is
I didn't realize it was a bull market. You were getting gold.
There's literally gold. I don't know if the camera can capture this, but there's literally gold on this piece of chicken.
Big bull market vibes.
Big bull market. I did not realize when I ordered this, it wasn't in English. So I just ordered stuff, but it's like they knew we're at a bull market. They're just going to sprinkle some gold on it. How did the gold taste? What does gold taste like, David?
Gold actually has no taste, but it tastes like the permanent bull market is here. The super cycle has been activated.
Okay, let's manifest it into existence. And how's that spicier spice tasting?
It's much not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
You gotta be a little more aggressive with it.
Yeah, you gotta really get into it there.
Yeah, really get in there.
We want you sweating.
If you're not crying through your final spicy take that Jonah's got for you, then you're not trying hard enough.
All right. So, spicy question. If we can get forced inclusion,
Definitely.
and we can get withdrawals,
Now you're feeling it?
does it matter at all if any L2 is centralized, as long as you can guarantee that censorship resistant and that right to exit?
So I think actually does matter fully. And here's the kind of path I would argue to. You didn't say time to include the forced inclusion. And I think that's actually a really important thing. Let's take Tornado Cash as an example. Tornado Cash, which is a cryptocurrency mixing platform to allow you to kind of anonymize funds, was sanctioned by the United States government. And in the response of that, many validators who produce the blocks on Ethereum began to block transactions interacting with those contracts. It's now become impossible to land a transaction, right? Ethereum is still censorship resistant in that regard, but it became less practical to use. And so if the answer is we're going to have a 7-day forced inclusion window, I would ask you, would you feel comfortable using that rollup still? Are you fine taking out leverage on an Aave on an L2 if you have to wait 7 days before being guaranteed that you can exit and delever? You can be liquidated in that time frame. In fact, if the operator wanted to get really malicious and they saw there was a bunch of liquidations coming, they'd block everyone's ability to repay, liquidate them themselves, take the MEV and walk away. Candidly, I was talking to some security folks. We've all been very, very surprised that in this era of really risky rollups that no one has done the ultimate rug of drop a token, hide some TVL, and just walk away with the bridge. I think there's one example called ZK Casino, but the name in itself said what was going to happen. But I'd say to answer your question, no, I think that the actual ability to rapidly do forced inclusion or have a pathway to multiple people deciding across different jurisdictions on entry criteria is ultimately critical. I would say I actually think that even potentially removes the ability to do forced inclusion. I would make an argument that for something like Polygon POS, if we get to the point where there's the bridge, if we get to the point that there's a ZK security on there, does forced inclusion need to happen if there's 100 globally distributed validators across a bunch of different jurisdictions that can't be all immediately blocked? Is that decentralized enough that we don't need to wrap the forced inclusion plan? Would that be secure?
Jonah, I'm curious to hear your take on it since you posed the question. It sounds like you have some opinions as well.
I think the way that I think about this, to take a step back, is I think that decentralization is not the thing that actually matters, but rather it's a means to an end. And the end that we care about is different depending on what we're actually doing. So for chains, the things we care about with decentralization are censorship resistance and security. Those are the two top priorities in terms of decentralization. It's why we pay for security, the gas fees and token mechanisms and whatever else that is done. And so I did like the nuance on the point of the time to forced inclusion, right? If it was instant forced inclusion, that's somewhere that I would agree.
Or very rapid.
Very rapid, right. And I totally agree. I love that example of you have an Aave loan that could be liquidated, and you need to get your forced inclusion before that loan is liquidated so you can actually withdraw your assets. So yeah, I would agree with you.
POS went and we had 100 validators globally distributed. Do we need forced inclusion? Or is that decentralized enough?
Isn't that POS today?
So if you're saying if we have the bridge secured, would you consider it a rollup?
Rollups aren't real.
Rollups aren't real.
Rollups aren't real. The final spicy take. Did you have any final questions for David, Jonah?
What has
Can we
been
squeeze one more spicy take out of him?
What has been the spiciest thing you've heard from someone else at DevCon so far?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Someone else said it.
Name the names too.
Someone else said it, and I agree with it. The Ethereum Foundation definitely needs assistance in how it communicates with the broader public, especially at major events like DevCon, that confidence in the overall roadmap especially has started to get a bit shaky, and the relationship with L2s needs to be reformed, acknowledged, or discussed a bit more. An unfortunate bit amount of disappointment on what should be a really celebratory week for the community.
Boom.
Spicy enough?
That was spicy, yeah. Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us today and talking about rollups. I'm not going to lie, some of this was definitely way over my head, but I imagine people who are listening that you're going to be telling about this will be on the same wavelength as you and will understand what you're saying. So, and thanks, Jonah, for co-hosting this with me, so I wasn't so left in the dust with all the technical talk. So thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us, Diana.
Thanks, Diana.
Thanks so much for listening to this special live edition of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. To attend a future live podcast show, please join us on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3 and follow us on all social channels at rehashweb3 so you don't miss any upcoming announcements for live podcast show dates. We'll also be launching a new round of guest elections in January, right after the holidays. So start thinking about which new and old guests you want to hear on the podcast again in 2025. Finally, please follow, subscribe, comment, and share this episode across whichever channels you spend the most time on, as that'll really help us get this episode and other Rehash episodes heard by as many people as possible. Thank you so much for being part of the Rehash community for another year, and I cannot wait to keep yapping away with you all in 2025.